Well, good morning, Felicia. It's so good to see you again.
Thank
you.
It's
so nice Felicia came in this morning. We haven't seen each other in 10 years.
Right.
Oh,
It's
really?
been a long time.
Yes, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So Felicia Chu in with us today.
The us would be good morning to Shelly Case and Jonathan Hoffman, sitting in for D. Simone and floating in a box somewhere. I don't know.
Somewhere. He's heading towards the high deserts of Chile, I believe.
Oh, great. Bring us back some good coffee and beans and things and stuff.
He's going to bring back some alpaca rope.
Alpaca
There you
rope.
go. Sweet.
They make rope out of alpaca
Yeah.
stuff.
This story keeps getting better and better.
Keep going, yes.
Stay with us till 9 o'clock. Who knows?
He'll be on the moon.
He'll be on the moon. Oh, goodness.
What's up?
Good morning.
Good morning.
What are you up to, Felicia?
About 5'2 3/4.
And that's it.
Yeah,
that's as far
about
as it goes. With a baseball cap, you're now 5'3".
Yes. Woo, woo.
Looking good. Looking good.
Thanks.
So what's up? What's going on these days?
So
Because you've got the blog. What's the blog called?
my blog doesn't
Yeah.
really have a name.
Oh.
It's just at FeliciaChu.com.
Okay, at
But
FeliciaChu.com.
I am just, I haven't updated that in a while.
Okay.
I've been busy with
Well, what are you
some other
doing
things.
then?
Well, I was just kind of filling in Shelly a little bit. You had been talking about that fox that's out there.
Uh-huh.
And so I am still working for the Environmental Education Exchange, still working with the kiddos, explaining to them how when we have less water in our aquifers, we do have wildlife coming in.
Come into town.
Yeah, so talking about what we need to do. And it's exciting getting the kids more engaged in how our life here in the Sonoran Desert really needs us to watch our water and really needs us to be water smart kids. And then, of course, the other work I'm doing to end the systemic cycle of domestic abuse among the courts, among the officers of the law. I just went on a walk this past Saturday with Justice for Rosauda. That's a group that was formed by her mother, April Barbosa. Rosauda would have celebrated her 20th birthday on Saturday. Unfortunately, she was murdered by her boyfriend. And so we just went on a walk from where she had lived over to the Freedom Park. And it was an anti-violence walk. And there were about 11 of us who spoke, who were survivors, and talking about what we thought could make things better and ending that system of domestic violence that continues because of the lack of trauma-informed courts, or just because people don't speak up when they see something. They don't say something.
Yeah, the courts is the last part of the line. We've got to do something before
Exactly.
we get to that.
Exactly. Just as individuals, as neighbors. So April had shared that some of the neighbors that day had actually seen Rosauda being beaten by her boyfriend, and nobody called in to law enforcement. And when the family didn't hear from her, they actually did call law enforcement asking them to help them get into the apartment, and nobody would help them. So my friend had to go in herself, and she was the one who found her daughter beaten and dead.
So where do we go? How do we get people? You've got to get people to speak up. You have to let them know that they can speak up and who they should speak up to. You speak up to the family. You speak up to the authorities. You speak up to a friend, their boss. I mean, you got to tell somebody.
Exactly. And I think, too, something that a lot of people miss is the person who is being abused obviously has experienced a lot of trauma. And what happens frequently then is that individual has a hard time themselves speaking up. For my personal story, my family did reach out to me. They knew something was going on. I wasn't spending as much time with them as I used to. My sister-in-law, in fact, was trying to reach out to me, and I didn't know what to say. You know, a lot of it, I thought it was my fault. I thought it was my fault that my ex-partner was, verbally assaulting me, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive. I blamed myself for a lot. And truth be told, my ex-partner, fed into that. We call that gaslighting,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Where they continue to lay on the blame and the shame and the guilt. And
they're into the control thing and everything else, and then you're afraid to do anything.
Correct. And even when law enforcement comes to the door, when a victim or survivor is in trauma mode or crisis mode, the responses are fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And unfortunately, the victim may come out as aggressive to the law enforcement officer or condescending, and law enforcement doesn't quite know what to do with that. Here in the state of Arizona, the state will press charges regardless of whether or not anybody wants charges pressed. If they come up with a finding that they believe there has been domestic abuse and they believe they've identified the perpetrator, they will file charges. And unfortunately, there are individuals who have been victims and survivors who have charges filed against them. In fact, I'm going to share, I actually have been charged. I've been charged with 2 misdemeanors and 4 felonies. And I really had to decide whether or not to share that, because I know as a political person, right, as somebody who's running for a campaign seat right now as county supervisor, I know that, it's the county attorney's office who is charging me with these crimes, and the city attorney. And there was a grand jury hearing, which I was not privy to, and I just received the transcript of it. And it was very one-sided. It was the investigating detective who ended up doing the testimony, and it happens to be the detective who, when he came to my door, I was concerned. He wanted to arrest my son. And I said,
And how old is your son now?
He is going to be 13 in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So he was 12. He wanted to arrest my son as a runaway. And I tried to explain why my son was not going. To clarify, I was arrested I was charged with custodial interference. Mm-hmm. As a protective parent, the statute actually says if you believe your child is in danger, and despite what the custody order might say, you have the right as a protective parent to keep your child. So that's what I did, and I was trying to explain that to the officers of the law. Apparently, I got a little bit aggressive is what he's saying. He says I was condescending, which is why I used those words earlier. I did call his supervisor because I thought, I don't think you understand. If you arrest a 12-year-old who is coming to law enforcement for protection, that is really going to, it's going to affect how that child sees law enforcement. And I had always taught my child, how law enforcement there is here to protect and serve us. And I've been one of the strongest supporters of law enforcement, coming especially from, the other side, right? A lot of people think, well, law enforcement is so terrible. And I'm like, no, law enforcement is here to protect and serve us.
So I remember years ago that someone that the officer could call to come in who is trained in that. I don't remember what they called them.
Victim advocates.
I can't pull out names like that in a minute. I'm not awake yet. Is that still around? Do we still have victim advocates that they can call anytime, day or night? Because they're between a rock and a hard place, too, but somebody's got to talk this thing out, and there's got to be a third party in here somewhere.
Right.
Do they do that?
We do still have victim advocates through the county attorney's office. There's a victim services division. The city has some victim advocates just in the courtroom. Emerge, the Center Against Domestic Abuse, right, is somebody who has a 24/7 line that law enforcement could also just call and put the person on the phone with them. However, again, the tricky part is when the officer has deemed that the victim or the survivor is the perpetrator or the instigator. I've actually gone to court before with a friend of mine, because with my small business, that's what I do now, is I'll go into court with friends or clients. And in this case, this young woman had called law enforcement herself. She had reported that she had been struck by her partner. So law enforcement arrived. The partner had taken off, and they interviewed her. They identified her as the victim, gave her the blue victim form. And then when the partner came back, the partner ended up saying that she had assaulted him. So it became a he said, she said, and they took her blue victim form and they placed her under arrest. When we went all the way to city court level, she was able to, again, talk and share her story with what had happened to the judge. And in fact, the partner admitted in the courtroom that he had been drunk and that he had hit her. And the city prosecutor then continued to argue that the woman who I was with was the one at fault, when the woman showed, in fact, that the officer, the arresting officer, didn't even include all of the information that she had given him. He did not take any pictures of her black eye. He did not take any pictures of her injury. He did not report that the partner had been drunk. And so when the judge heard everything, the judge dismissed it and said, I'm very sorry that this
there are
happened.
some big gaps.
Correct.
In the system, the training, the dealing with the day-to-day, the who to call, who to bring in.
Right.
Let's take a break, okay? And we'll be back with Felicia Chu, along with Shelly Keiss and Jonathan Hoffman in for the D-Man today. At 10:30, The Voice. Wake up, Tucson. You're waiting for him to sing, I know. Look at you guys. Wake up, Tucson, 7:24 already. Jonathan Hoffman, Shelly Keiss, and A here, and Felicia Chu. We have Matt Neely. Matt's on the line. Matt, what do you have to say on the subject this morning?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hola.
So, just two things. First of all, I mean, obviously in the news this week, domestic violence, holy smokes. I mean, the girl gets thrown out of a 3-story window by a 3rd-story balcony by a former boyfriend who had a protective order out against him, which had expired, and they ran into each other, and who knows if it was really by accident or not. But I mean, it just shows that all of a sudden all those issues come back to the forefront, and it is a very dangerous world out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would hope that would help, bring the issue into the public consciousness. But another thing, and I think this is maybe for victims themselves and also for friends and family and casual observers. I read a book by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear recently.
It's an excellent book.
And, a couple of takeaways that I got from it is subconsciously, something's wrong before you consciously realize it, right? So if something doesn't seem right and your body's telling, it just for some reason you stop and pause and think, well, that seemed odd. It probably is because it is. And so for an observer, kind of listen to that inner voice. And then obviously for a victim, I mean, once, and you can speak to this, Felicia, once the actual violence starts happening, obviously, that's obvious, but there are things that happen before that maybe can help the victim see maybe what's coming.
Sure, like the red flags. We definitely talk about how we might have red flags that, and like Matt said, trusting our gut and listening to our gut. Unfortunately, when the victim ends up feeling alone, earlier I was talking about just getting that isolation that happens, that physical isolation. In my situation, it was quite a distance to travel to get back to see my family, my parents and my brothers. In fact, we had ended up moving into the middle of the woods in New Mexico. I grew up in California, so it was a 15-hour drive, nonstop. And of course, if you stopped, then then it took longer. And in those woods, things that happened were when my ex-partner felt that one of us had done something that was inappropriate, that individual would have to go and find a switch. Living in the middle of the woods, there's lots of tree branches, etc. And he would instruct our children then to lay down on the ground, pulling their bottoms way down by their ankles, their tops way up above their heads. And he would beat them with these switches until they were bleeding, to the point when they were no longer able to walk. And then would turn to me and say, if you don't help, if you don't take over, I'm going to end up killing our kids. And so I would take that switch, and I would, a couple times just tap them on the butt, and then I would stop, and I would just be crying and not able to continue. Unfortunately, in courts of law, when I would try to bring up the fact that there had been domestic abuse in our situation, he would then say, well, you did it too. And when you have a judge that doesn't understand the situation, and the judge then deems that, you have also then committed an act of domestic abuse, and then will decide to maintain a 50-50 custody agreement, and you have a small child, and you're very worried about their safety, it becomes really difficult.
Felicia.
Yeah,
so, please go ahead, Jonathan.
That's a very compelling story, and I thank you for being so open, and I hope people find it very useful. But we're heading into a hard break now, and maybe when we come back, you can talk about your candidacy, and we can take a look at that.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.